It's Tuesday, April 22nd, 2014, and you're listening to SYN Boldly, the podcast of the Sign Your Name Project. I'm your host, Trey Comstock. With me this week, as ever, is the entire team with Kathleen Royston.
Hello.
And Stephen Doss.
With SYN Boldly Cat.
And the cat. On tonight's episode, we're going to talk about what friendship looks like across denominational divides and a broader discussion of, kind of some of the side effects of the commercialized church. But we start tonight with the look at friendship, not compromise, but friendship in the face of deep division in the news. So it turns out that the United Methodist Church is not the only church in the United States that has experienced, and continues to experience, deep division over LGBTQ inclusion. In fact, some years ago, the Episcopal Church outright split in half, where with some, staying connected to the Episcopal Church and the Archbishop of Canterbury in England, and the kind of infrastructure that exists already in the United States, after the ordination of a gay bishop, and then another group breaking off and kind of being a breakaway Anglican group in the United States. And so these two sides have been in a long, protracted battle over property rights, something I think we talk about a lot with the United Methodist Church, this issue of, in the divorce, who gets what, and that's one of those kind of we talked about last week and a couple of weeks ago, one of those really contentious issues surrounding when churches split. Which makes the story that I came across in the New York Times all the more interesting. So there's this, very liberal, progressive Episcopal bishop named Shannon Johnson, the Reverend Johnson. And he is known for blessing gay unions and, being kind of fairly progressive even for an Episcopal bishop. And recently, a few years back, he became friends with the Reverend Tory Bauckham. I'm saying this wrong probably, but we'll go with Bauckham. Back in 2011. What happened was Bauckham essentially befriended the bishop. And Bauckham is the rector at a conservative breakaway Anglican church in Northern Virginia. And so he has become good friends with the progressive bishop of Virginia for the Episcopal. So it's this Anglican Episcopal friendship that kind of is grown and nurtured over, it sounds like dark beer and poetry. Or light beer and dark poetry. Either way, it's kind of the same thing. And what's interesting is some of this is the comments that these two men talk about it, that, it's, Reverend Bauckham talks about how it's Christian, that, in Christianity, peacemaking is not optional, it's mandatory, it's required, and so this is his, efforts at peace, at being a peacemaker. The bishop also responds with, the importance of this. They also still call each other out about their differences in public. Is not about compromise. This is about friendship in spite of differences. And there's the other side, that the extreme liberals and the extreme conservatives freak out about this, viewing them as traitors or as dangerous, or how do you associate with this person that's so antithetical, like the archbishop in charge of the Anglicans is you can't associate with Bishop Johnson because he brought in Dominic Crossan and he denies Christ.
Why does he sound like a whiny 4-year-old?
Well, because both sides are going to sound like whiny 4-year-olds.
Okay, good. Just
and so the liberal bloggers this man is bigoted. Why do you hang out with such a bigoted man? I was Midwestern, I don't know what that was. And so, there's this, sniping within the extremist bloggers and the extreme leaders, and both Bauckham and Johnson are yeah, I'll tell you where to go and how to get there. We can be friends and have deep difference, which is something I think that is utterly lost in American religious discussion, utterly lost in American political discussion. This art not necessarily of compromise, but not hating the person you disagree with. Mm-hmm. So I thought this was an interesting story, both of where the UMC could be in a few years, and and, what it looks like to reach across the aisle, if not in compromise, but at least in Christian love and, sister and brotherhood. So, what are y'all's thoughts on this story or its implications for broader theology?
I guess I'll take it, because Kathleen looks like she's about to fall asleep.
This is going to make for a great show. Woo!
It's like SYN Broly, only Kathleen's
here
to be like, guys,
Stop!
I want to pet the cat again.
Kitty.
I like how we just did like the most gendered thing ever, where like Kathleen's like just wants to go to sleep and pet cats. Because she's a lady.
I don't think it's because she's a lady. It is because she's Kathleen.
That's
though.
true. Yeah,
It is because I'm a cat lady.
This is not necessarily a gendered thing.
No, it's
but
just
it
a
is
Kathleen thing.
It is a Kathleen thing,
Certainly
and I'm
a
friends.
Kathleen.
And I am friends with Kathleen,
yes.
even though we disagree on almost everything. Well, actually, we don't. We don't disagree on anything. But I do have friends that I.
You don't disagree on anything? That's a remarkably bold
We're
statement.
just friends?
Yeah, friends with tax benefits. Married. Anyway.
I need a vacation. I need a vacation someplace that is not here.
So, anyway, I still have some friends who are on the more conservative spectrum. That's one of the good things about living in rural Alabama. I have lots of, people giving random Bible verses that are from Job about how God provides. Apparently they think God provides boils, but that's why they use Job for, and all that stuff. And it's like, I can still be friends with you. I can still want to hang out with you. I can still want to have a glass of Coke, and because I don't drink beer that often, and I can still want to hear about your day and all that stuff, because you are a person, you're not an ideology. And I think that's the problem we get into, especially with people who want page views.
Oh yeah,
because they're not trying to make a point anymore. The point's been made, and the point has been made much better than the way they're making it. They're trying to drive up stuff. That's why they're going to have upworthy headlines like, "You'll never believe what this person did. Number 4 was amazing," and number 4 is just, someone walked someone across the street. Big whoop, who gives a doodle? Anyway, it's promoting themselves by using this, and I think the problem is like, you attach someone so closely to an ideology that you're like, well, that's all they are. Someone might see you, Mr. Trey, as here's someone who is completely out there in left field about this, and that's all he is, and they don't know that you also enjoy writing plays. Or they look at Kathleen and they say, that's a crazy cat lady, and she always will be a crazy cat lady.
well, that's probably
And then
true.
it turns out she is a crazy... I mean, but they also don't see her scarf down a hamburger.
Steven, what are you talking about?
I'm saying that we sometimes, when we're on one side of an argument, we other the other side of the argument. We don't make them a person. They are an ideology.
Well, and I think
they are what we are against in
Right.
human form.
Well, and I think that's interesting if you look at kind of the movies that have been coming out recently. So I've been doing a congregational Bible study surrounding the different Christian marketed movies that have been coming out.
God's not dead.
That
He's
one-
surely alive.
That one in particular. And I watch people go to this movie and they're sitting going, yeah, no, right on. And the atheist guy's just a monster. Not even just he's not just an atheist, he's a bad person. And
That's what atheists are, Trey.
No, but
Sarcasm quotes. Sarcasm, that was sarcasm.
right. But so I think this is spilled over into how we represent our opponents in media. I remember, and we talked about this in the pre-show, there was a photo spread from Air Force One of a whole bunch of American dignitaries flying to attend Nelson Mandela's funeral. And you have George W. Bush and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, funny, and the Obamas, all sitting around a dinner table, laughing and telling jokes, and W is leaning in close to Hillary, whispering something in her ear, and Hillary's cracking up. And so this, all this kind of peace, love, and happiness, right? And bloggers on both sides, like, how can they even look at each other? How can they even stand to, like, be in the same space with each other? And, oh, it's crazy. And it's like, look, it turns out they actually just know each other. Mm-hmm. And they can actually be friends in spite of, what... I think that's it, actually. In spite of all the kind of BS and everything. So, yeah. Definitely. But also, I think this extends to a congregational level, too. I look at my own congregation. Like, I disagree with them on plenty of stuff. I'm not quite sure they know how deeply I disagree, perhaps, but I disagree with them on plenty of stuff. But we get along and we do church. And that's an important thing, that there can be these relationships. And theoretically, like, Methodist and Episcopal theology is built around this ability to disagree.
Yeah.
Like, both of our theologies are built around that. And it's so funny how hard the doctrinal lines get over this issue of inclusion. And that always drives me crazy.
Especially when the doctrinal lines are meant to be fluid. It's meant to be like, hey, as long as you subscribe to these core sets of belief, what you do with them, that's your own thing. Because it's your context, it's your placement. I would, assume that rural church in Georgia isn't going to have the same way of applying those doctrinal standards to as a church in middle of urban Atlanta.
Right.
Because it's two different contexts. You can't do that. If you say it's one way for everyone, then it can't be any way for anyone.
Right, and for some reason, what I believe is the only way to believe.
Yeah.
Which, there are certainly denominations that is... that have very specific creeds and all of that. But for both the United Methodist Church and the Episcopal Church, as I understand it, what we're both signing on to is the same basic articles of religion. Mm-hmm. And that's what we sign on to. And as long as we sign on to those, you're square. You are square. We interpret the articles of religion through the lens of Wesley, and they interpret it through, who knows? Tea and beer. I don't know, but...
And funny hats.
And definitely funny hats.
And lots of bourbon.
Yes. And sherry, perhaps.
Oh, sherry,
yes, a good dose of sherry.
So on today's episode of Sin Boldly,
Episcopalians
are all alcoholics.
Well, you know the difference between a Methodist and Episcopal, right?
What?
Episcopalians will look each other in the eye in the liquor store.
Wherever three or more gather, there's always a fifth. Anyway, I can tell Episcopal jokes all day. I think that this story resonated with me. I think anyone who has had the privilege of working with a congregation or being in a congregation with people who your theology is not the same and your politics are not the same, and you learn to love each other deeply as human beings. I think that's a really, really powerful experience. And I think that is one of the things about being progressive clergy type in the South, is I think you get thrown into those situations naturally. But those are really powerful. And I can think of parishioners that I love dearly and they love me. And there are things that they say and do that I think make baby Jesus cry.
Sure.
But that doesn't change how deeply I love them as human beings. And it's not even this sort of like, I love you because Jesus says I have to. Like, I love their particularities too. Like, I love them for them.
My favorite bumper sticker that I'll slightly abridge for this show, that God loves you and everyone else thinks you're a jerk.
Yeah. But it's not just that. It's not just sort of generic Christian love. It's deep care for other human beings, and that transcends these theological differences, not to minimize their importance, because they're there and they need to be talked about. But it is really a privilege to learn to love the people who you would not have chosen. So,
I mean, I think that is something important to consider, that it is actually inherently rooted in the life of a congregation, but the blogosphere and these and the debates surrounding this, I think, get away from that. Mm-hmm. That it's really, I think Stephen brought this point up too, that it's really easy to, other someone on a distant connection on the other side of the internet.
Yeah.
But it's very different when you're reading poetry and drinking Guinness. I mean, that's a different dynamic that opens up a different potential for, viewing. And, they've gotten in trouble for calling each other brothers in Christ.
But they are brothers in Christ, right?
I mean, quite literally, yes.
Yeah.
In that we are all, we are all part of the body of Christ, and they haven't,
How dare you think someone has sacred worth?
Right.
Who disagrees with you?
Who disagrees with you?
Right, but, their disagreements run deep. They're still calling each other out in public. But that doesn't mean they can't be friends, which is, I think, something that's lost from our entire political process, and I kind of wish we could get back. So, Rob Renfro, you want to come on the show? Come on. We'll be glad to talk to you.
We'll have a pint.
Sure. Yes.
Of something, I don't know. Friend of the show.
Sure. Why not? So, speaking of Rob Renfro in a way, it brings us to this week's discussion.
What does Rob Renfro have to do with anything?
Well, so he works at a really big church.
Oh, okay.
Like a really big church. Called the Woodlands United Methodist. Right near where I went to high school, oddly enough. And so there is often a tendency in church today that church kind of becomes a country club of sorts. And some of this leads to, shall we phrase it, questionable marketing strategies, especially surrounding Easter as a, large, important Sunday where you're going to get a lot of people in the door. You're
going to get the unchurched in the door.
Yeah. The sermon resource that I use, thank you, General Board of Discipleship, called it the Sunday of Sundays. I kept joking throughout the day like that. Yeah, that's really helping my stress
Is that
level.
like Hevelim? That's the same thing.
Yeah, it's about
the Sundayest to Sundays.
Like, come on, guys. Like, this
As
is
in vanity of vanity.
Yeah.
this is stressful enough. Okay, like I don't need any help being stressed out about this Sunday, but. I know for us, like, we did run a flyer in our bulletin that we don't normally do, calling for volunteers and sign-ups for VBS.
Yeah.
And so, it was a chance that we thought, maybe we'll see some folks that we don't necessarily see as often. And it was a pretty big Sunday for us. We had 78 people, which is
good, since that town only has 79 people.
The town has, like, 700 people. And so, like, I pulled, like...
That's pretty impressive.
That
close
is pretty
to
impressive.
10% of the town, on a Sunday, which
Yeah.
for my little dinky church ain't so bad. Like, things are going well. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about, I don't necessarily think it's theologically troubling to promote VBS.
No, it's not.
It wasn't the core of the service. We mentioned it
Yeah.
in announcements because it's an important ministry of the church. It's an important outreach. A lot of the new families that we've gotten have come in through VBS. It's been really cool, and it's a chance to, I have a professor that says everything the church should do should be about the children. Oh, the children, how we love the children. And
well, I believe the children are our future. We should teach them
They
well.
cause the future.
Children cause the future.
I may once have said that children cause the future.
I believe the children are our future.
Let's be clear
Teach
that
them
everything
well.
except children was on purpose.
That's what made it so good. Anyway.
So Kathleen, you're the one who kind of brought this up. So, kind of, where are you going with this?
Yeah. I have a lot of feelings.
All of the feelings.
All of the feeling.
And granted, some of the feelings that I'm feeling is because I have been spending some good quality time with an Evangelical Lutheran Church of America congregation. And I haven't hung out with the Lutherans in a very long time. And there's some things that are, it's sort of what's not said that I've noticed. And so that's a little bit of what's brought this on, is that when we look at Resurrection Day, because y'all, Easter is 50 days.
So does that mean I get chocolate on Tuesdays now?
Sure. Looking at Resurrection Sunday is just that time to, like, catch everybody that, one of the two times that they're in the door. And if it becomes the focus of, what you're doing there is not celebrating the risen Lord, it's, we need to make sure that we get butts in the seats. We get X number of butts in the seats, and we're geared up for our next thing, if the point of that, like if that's what it becomes, it's an instrumentalization of worship in a really troubling kind of way. I think that the liturgy stands on its own for Resurrection Day. And that's not to say that church programs aren't important, but it's a high holy day.
Mm-hmm.
And to sort of push that aside in some ways and say, but what's really important is this next big thing we have coming up. Like, what are you there to celebrate? Do you know what I mean?
I think that is certainly one way to view a high holy day. And as someone who values liturgy, I think that makes sense. Another way to look at it is your best marketing opportunity. Full stop, the end. This and Christmas Eve are going to be your kind of highest exposure for anything you're putting out there.
But the problem is when the marketing overshadows the reason you're there. When the fact that you want people to, and I'm just going to toss this out here, you want people to come to the Wednesday night suppers. I assume a lot of churches do Wednesday night suppers. You're like, hey, come on Wednesday nights, and that's the main focus of it. And then you go and like, oh, well, we have Wednesday night suppers, and on Thursdays we have, make sure you check out, if you're young, check out our youth group. And when it becomes just a list instead of the liturgy.
But do you honestly think that that's happening? Where it's just 30 minutes or 45 minutes
Not 30
of
or 45 minutes of announcements, but a lot of times when it's like, yeah, when I do suspect there are some churches, I'm not sure, but I do suspect there's some churches that want to promote what they have so they can get more butts and seats.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that. It's just when that becomes the main focus of Easter.
I just think, but I also think
The
that
Easter
there's
season.
a danger in that because it means that what happens on Sunday morning is not, and this is, I will say, this is the Lutheran in me. Like, this is. But when the focus of a church becomes its programming and, like, the outside stuff that's offered, you know, and think about, there are lots and lots of churches that have things like basketball leagues and, you know, all of these other things. And I don't think there's intrinsically anything wrong with it, but when the central act of worship in your church becomes promoting your programs, I think that's really kind of dangerous. I think there's something powerful about liturgy that stands on its own. That, like, we are taking time, like, high holy days are taking time out of the rest of your life. It's like a moment sort of transcended. And for a culture in which everything is overscheduled and crazy busy and it's moving constantly from one thing to the next, there's something really powerful about saying we are going to stand in the presence of the risen Lord and just
chill.
Stand here.
I think to a certain extent you can do both. You can take that time out, but this also is, you know, possibly the only time you'll see these people during a week. And so it's a chance both to catch up on the life of the community, which itself has value, and, you know, and worship together. But it's a part of a broader chance of doing life together.
But there is, and I don't know what you're about to say, so, okay, I just wanted to jump in and say, there is a difference, though, with concerning yourself with the life of the community and then trying to grab people and bring them in, like, not like in a, you know, hey, we want you to come worship with us and stuff, but like, we want your life to be the life of this community in a way that is very, like, we want your schedule to be our schedule.
Sure.
Well, and quite as a pastor to be, I would rather what the people who show up twice a year to get would to be the, like, let's stand in the presence of God than, like, hey, we have this other thing going on. Like, I would rather, like, that's the grabbing that I want to do, is not necessarily, because I think that people who come twice a year have their reasons for coming twice a year.
Yeah.
And what I think that what I would like that twice a year to be is not, oh, we have all of these other offerings, but to, like,
To give you what you need right now.
to, like, yeah.
Yeah.
And not to say, like, oh, we also have all these other things that are really fun.
You should come back instead of you're here now.
Instead, yeah, that's, for me, that feels like meeting people where they are.
Symbolic categories.
Or just wanted to groan. Is using, like, that moment being what that moment is.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like, and we would, I mean, not that we don't want people to come back, because we do, but I think that that's between, the coming back is between them and Jesus.
But I wonder if I wonder if that's almost an over spiritualization of it, because part of what's being offered is understanding what are your opportunities to respond. What is the opportunity to respond to what you're experiencing? And some of that maybe what you're really interested in is further study. And so there's a further study that's happening. Mm-hmm. Or maybe what you're really interested in is a different worship opportunity. Maybe, you came and this style of worship isn't working. Maybe there's another service that I could attend that's also happening. And so there's a chance, it opens up kind of the wider array of opportunities, because I think most of what we do in church, or should be some way in focused in spiritual growth. And that's something, when I'm talking about how we plan our whatever, mm-hmm. And some of that spiritual growth is growth together as a community through fellowship. And that is something that's important too. But I try to talk about, what's the purpose behind this event? Or what's the purpose behind this thing that we're doing? And always bringing it back to, both reaching out and forming disciples.
But I think that's you, and I think that's really responsible of you. I don't think that's how it plays out in a lot of places. I think it plays out as in, if we say it's ministry, it's ministry. So if we say that, our sports camp is ministry,
I mean, it can be.
It's ministry.
It can be, but how often?
I ran a sports camp in Poland where we worshipped hardcore twice a day, and it was this really cool.
I'm gonna guess that most American church. I'm just saying. I think that your understanding of it is probably, if you were really looking at stuff and saying, how is this activity making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world?
Which
I think
do.
that, but I don't think that everywhere is like that.
And some people say, well, this is a revenue generator.
Sure.
Yeah.
This is.
Well, I mean, and that's I'm thinking about how we do things at my church is we do have kind of 5 minutes of announcements that but before we greet. This is kind of before the main body of the worship service. We have kind of 5 minutes, actually depending how long my leader takes to go through the list, of announcements of just, because this, we don't have email blasts. We don't have we have a call tree, but that's only used for prayer requests, and I don't want to mess with that because, you don't want twitchy 80-year-old woman here's the call. Oh my God, who's died? And it's just hey, come to dinner.
Just wanted to see how you do. But that makes a good point, is that's at least a little bit of human interaction.
Right.
And I think a lot of times we just, when we're at church, when we're giving these announcements, it's not, it's not you're standing in the back going, hey, what'd you think? Let's talk. Oh, well, we have this opportunity to serve. We have this, and this, and this.
Yeah.
Done.
I also try to keep not program to a minimum, but I mean, we're a church of now 2 staff, and so there's only so much programming that we're really offering, right?
I think also, a question to ask is how much of the business of the church is business, and how much of, how many of these? Because I think that programs get I think that this programming business in the church, and what I've seen in Methodist churches, gets a little complicated. And, what does it mean? The central act, I firmly believe that the central act of the church should be worship.
Yes.
Yes.
That's where the energy goes. That's where the time goes. That's where the resources go. And I think that keeping that in mind is important,
But I think you and I define worship differently. So there was a church I used to go to in Williamsburg, actually Williamsburg United Methodist, whose announcement insert in the bulletin, this is a pretty big church, said, "This is also our worship." And it lists the different opportunities during the week to do whatever. Mm-hmm. The Stevens ministers are meeting here, or the pack the lunch for the kids thing, or the various activities where this is also our worship. And so if we're defining programming as things that offer worshipful opportunities, which I guess can be jazzercise, maybe. I'd have never done jazzercise, or church yoga, or who knows. I don't want to close the door on what someone else might find worshipful. But I think some of that has to do with how we do programming in the church. I don't really like the term programming, only because I learned it in the terms of like college activities board, and that was programming. And I really do try to think about it as, what are the opportunities that we offer for people to grow? And for some people, like, they'll grow in worship. But for my dad, like, so take my dad as a perfect example of this. Up until he discovered contemporary worship, dude wasn't getting jack out of worship, as strictly defined as smells and bells, soap and Sunday morning, stand up, sit down. We would sit there and make fun of hymns, and then we had a lot of fun. But he wasn't getting a whole lot out of it. But what he got a lot out of was mission trips, and working with the youth, and Bible studies with the youth, and being a Sunday school teacher. And that was what was worshipful to him.
And I can totally get on board with that. I also think that there needs to be, like, this is me being grumpy and Lutheran, sorry. But there needs to be some sort of personal, I'm going to say personal responsibility on that too. That, like, yes, the church partners, like, this might be my own baggage, like, I don't believe it is the job of the church to provide places for you to easily fit in and serve. Like, I think that's a team effort. Like, I think when it's done well, it's not a staff-driven thing. It's not a, like, we're going to do it this, like, this is, all you got to do is show up.
I'm not arguing that. I mean, these can be lay-created opportunities. Yeah. And many of them often are.
And I do think, though, that those can, it's important to keep a balance in those, and to not have so many tiny little moving pieces. Like, I'm all about simplifying that. Like, I think that, like, doing 900 different Bible studies from, everyone from the Cokesbury stuff
Willow Creek has 5,000 Bible small groups.
Right. No, I'm not talking about small groups. I'm talking about different kinds. Like, being intentional about the kind of programming. Saying, we're going to not do Bethmore Bible studies in our Methodist church is probably pretty reasonable.
Yes.
Like, everyone's going to do disciple. Suck it up, like, and I sound like I'm being really inflexible, but I think that being intentional in that like 100,000 different moving pieces that are all going in different directions, I think when programming is considered, it needs to be thought about as, what is the mission of our church? How are we reaching our community? What kind of church do we want to be?
Sure,
instead of sort of slapdash. I do think, though, that Easter is not the time necessarily to advertise all the great things you have going on in the church. I'm going to get in so much trouble for this.
You advertise that Christ the Lord is risen today.
Hallelujah.
But I think
he is risen indeed.
But I think that does take somewhat too limited a view of how people worship. That for some people, they're going to find that in the Sunday morning service. But not everyone's going to find it there. Just, it's an issue of learning styles as anything else. That just not everyone's going to find it in the Sunday morning worship service. And some of it is talking about, if this is not where you find your spiritual core, here are some other places that you might be able to find it. And for some people, it's running the scout troop. And for some people, it's the contemporary service that they didn't know existed. And for some people, it's that Bible study, because what they really want is that small group interaction, and that's what's really worshipful for them. And so it's opening up those opportunities to them. Again, assuming you're being intentional about the programming you're offering, which I think goes for regardless of how you're promoting it. There needs to be an intentionality and I certainly, in my own work as a pastor, try to do this. Do I always succeed? No. Talk to me about 1890s Day. But... But I also see that, like, fellowship opportunities are a chance for us to grow closer together, and so I'm not going to chuck the baby out with the bathwater. But I think in this chance when people will come and they may not really know what this church is, what this church is about, and if they walk away not filled by worship, because that's just, that definition of worship doesn't work for them, these are other ways. Now, we can debate how far that goes out, right? Is it the basketball team? Or, maybe that can be worshipful in the fellowship and in the accountability that comes with being a part of a team. I can pitch it. I should have gotten an advertising. I can pitch you on just about anything. But how far does that go? But again, it's opening up opportunities for people who the Sunday morning worship service may just not work for them. In terms of their own spiritual development, that may not be how they find God. And that I don't want to close the door on that.
And so maybe what I'm advocating for is intentionality in church programming. I mean, that may be really what's behind this. Because I don't disagree with you, although I think that net gets cast a little bit too far in the Methodist Church, which is
Absolutely.
we've decided that, I don't know, pick your ridiculous thing, is ministry because we say
Jazzercise.
right, like because we say it is.
Sure.
And so I think at the expense of, because like people who are overscheduled are going to pick, like, let's be honest, they're going to pick jazzercise over hard Bible study. Like,
Right.
And
Look, I can pitch you on anything.
I think that maybe that's the problem, is what I may be advocating for is fewer, more quality things, and worship is still being central. I can't get around that, and I don't think Wesley could get around that. The social holiness business, like, that matters. And I think that there's a level of accountability in corporate worship that you don't necessarily have in, not that Wesley didn't love small groups, but you don't as it actually works out in real life, in super independent small groups, you don't have that same
But keep in mind
level of accountability.
Keep in mind what Wesley required versus what Wesley didn't require. What was required was class membership.
Yep.
Full stop, the end. The rest of it was optional.
But there was accountability, and I don't think we have that in modern Methodism.
Yeah, but that's a different conversation. That there should be accountability in small groups is a different conversation. But what he required was what now we would call programming.
Yes, but accountability. I mean, that's so, like, I think the way that some of this is me recognizing what actually how this can actually
how it can
play
go
out
desperately wrong
and very quickly.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
So, that's something to consider. And so I think when you have, as a pastor, even in a medium-sized church, when you have a bajillion different little things going on, and people come from different traditions and end up doing Bethmore Bible studies, like, stuff can get bad really, really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And so that's I guess the practical side of it. But I can't be okay with Easter being the time when everything else is promoted.
Well, I think there's ways to do it, right?
I agree with that.
It's the insert in the bulletin.
Right,
it's
exactly.
the PowerPoint running before you come in.
Right.
It's the 5 minutes of announcements that we do every Sunday, and we just included VBS in it because, we're getting into the push where we need to start planning that. Like, I'm not talking about that this is essentially like what we used to call like kickoff night for youth group,
right?
Where the first
like
night
rally day for the unchurched.
Right. No, that's not like what I'm talking about is if you have announcements built into your structure, maybe you leave that in. Partly then people because you don't
want it right. You don't want to take it out if it's already there.
I try to do enough weird things to them in worship, and I try to leave some things that they're comfortable with. And if announcements is one of those things, fine.
Yeah. And announcements have a place because people need to know what's going on in the life of the church. However,
but you don't want to make it the core.
Yeah, you don't want to make it the core.
Worship
you don't
is
want
not
to make
worship is not fundamentally a marketing opportunity. It does happen to also be a marketing opportunity.
Right.
And you
but it depends on what you're marketing. Are you marketing that Christ the Lord is risen today? Are you marketing
how the
that...
Are you marketing discipleship? Or are you marketing consumerism?
Yep.
I mean, that's a question.
Right.
It reminds me, we just got done watching the Simpsons episode with Lisa becomes a Buddhist because the church is marketing everything.
Corporate sponsorship.
Oh, I heard about that. I haven't
it's
seen
a
it
good.
yet.
It's a good episode. It's got Richard Gere in it. But yeah, it's like, and now to give a brief sermon on the value of freshness, it's the Noid.
That's really funny.
So that's
money change, get your money changed right here in the temple.
So I think that's a question to ask too: is what's being marketed?
Sure.
And that needs to be truth-telling needs to happen around that too, because I think that we can convince ourselves that Christian Pilates is really bringing people into the church and bringing people.
It's bringing people into the church, but are they staying?
Right. Is it actually building disciples?
Yeah. Our bodies in the building the same thing as disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
I'm gonna go ahead and say no.
I usually argue no.
Now you have to
you have to balance that though.
Right. But it's something, it's something to consider.
And I don't know. I look at big churches, and part of how they stay big is they have these really wide-ranging activities.
They're community centers.
They become kind of like community centers with underlying principles. And they spend millions of dollars to become better-looking community centers for when people are church shopping. They go, here is the church that meets my
First
wants.
thing that people look at
is your children's center, usually.
Nope.
What?
Parking lot.
Parking lot.
Sure.
Big parking lot means people come, so they're going to want to come.
Well, then we're out on that because we max out our parking lot to the point where my lovely ex-Air Force pilot is trying to think out logistically how to better organize our parking lot. My church is kind of cool. I do think when I was planning the Easter service, I considered taking announcements out for that Sunday, for last Sunday. I really did, because it did seem like an awkward way to start an Easter service. And what I did is instead I left announcements in, and then just after announcements front-loaded a lot of other kind of important elements. So I instead of having the solo later, I did the solo right after announcements and passing the peace. And I had us process in during the first hymn, and I tried to build up the front end of the service to draw a really hard line that say business is over. Now something really different is happening.
The Lutherans I've been hanging out with, I really love how they do it structurally. I've never seen it done this way, and I think it's really cool. And granted, they do communion every week because they're Lutherans, but they do after the sermon, so after the readings, after the sermon, before the offertory, they do announcements about community stuff, and they're a very engaged kind of church, and so they do lots of social justice-y type things and interesting Bible studies, and they do that as sort of the precursor to the offertory, that you're offering your time.
Yeah,
and I've never found a place to put announcements in a service that didn't make me cringe, and I could get on board with that. And it's before the Great Thanksgiving, so it's we're responding to the word with our time and with our efforts. And then it's the offering, and then it's communion.
Sure. I think the approach I take is just draw a hard line between, so that basically for me worship starts at 11:05 rather than at 11 o'clock. And so basically we have some, everything, we do passing the peace, and after passing the peace, that's when worship starts. And that's, to me, the line I draw. The acolytes do not come in until after passing the peace. The opening prayer is not till after passing the peace. It's basically, baseball style, worship starts at 11:05, but the TV coverage picks up at 11 o'clock. We're not going to resolve this, and to a certain extent, there's nothing to resolve, rather than it is seeking intentionality, which is, I think, something we all can get on board with. So on that note, it's probably time for us to get out of here and shift the studio onto the next show. If you have any feedback, what is it? Sin Boldly at endfear.org, facebook.com/the Sign Your Name Project, or at Sin Boldly on Twitter. And go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and end fear by signing your name. Good night.
Poor Steven. Hi, Steven.
Hi, Sydney!